All right, everyone. Let's begin. Tonight's topic. What is tonight's topic? Conversion. Conversion to Judaism. What is the origin of conversion? Where do we find it in the Torah?
Book of Ruth.
Well, the book of Ruth is maybe one of the best illustrations. But you could say, as Rabbi Shlomo Goren, former chief rabbi of Israel, once wrote, that the Israelites at Mount Sinai became Jews by choice, converts to Judaism. And here's an interesting paradox. We think of Abraham as the very first, quote, Jew, even though the term Jew was not used until probably the 8th century BCE, a little bit before, the tribe of the people of Judah, tribe of Judah. But we find something very interesting according to Shlomo Goren. He contends Abraham was really a Gentile. A Gentile? How could you say such a thing? What about Isaac and Jacob? What about their children? These are all very interesting questions.
Well, Abraham didn't start out as a Jew.
Well, Philo of Alexandria tells us something very important that might answer this question. He would argue that they are Israelites. And the reason why is because we have written laws in the Torah, and we also have a concept of unwritten law. So what exactly is an unwritten law? It is a law that is rooted in custom and tradition. And one of the things that he emphasizes is that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were people who lived by the principles that later became enshrined in the Pentateuch. So he would probably identify the patriarchs as Israelites, or at least proto-Israelites. But it is interesting in rabbinic literature we do not consider, at least according to a number of modern ultra-Orthodox scholars, they do not consider Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob Israelite per se. On the other hand, we find that we're told that they did observe Torah. But did they observe Torah?
There was no Torah.
There's no Torah, so how could they observe it? But what about Father Jacob? What did Father Jacob do? He married 2 sisters. Now, if you say he observed the entire Torah, how do you justify him marrying 2 sisters, which is explicitly forbidden in the book of Leviticus, chapter 18? In fact, we say, cursed is the person who marries 2 sisters. You might be surprised how commonplace that is today among people. So were the answer did Abraham convert to Judaism through Ritmillah? Well, the whole concept of circumcision, of ceremonial circumcision, comes directly from Abraham. Now, was he fully circumcised? Well, that's an interesting question. No, he wasn't. Abraham only had partial circumcision, and the Israelites only practiced partial circumcision until the age of the Maccabees. What happened in the age of Maccabees? Inquiring minds want to know. Well, the Israelites, you might be surprised to know, the Jews used to go to the gymnasium. And gymnasium in Greek means naked. It was a place where young Greek men would show off their bodies, and they would participate in Greek wrestling and other different sports that later became foundation of the Olympics. And so a lot of Jews during that time, they took what was left of their foreskin and they underwent a painful operation, and they now appear to be as if they were never circumcised. And so the circumcision changed from that time on. The Maccabees said, we're going to have to insist on taking off almost the entire foreskin. And this way, and this became the standard for people converting to Judaism. Now, for men converting to Judaism, circumcision is not an easy process. And to some degree, when a Jewish court requires it, it's meant to see whether that person is truly serious or not. All right, so let's go back over here. So we look at the patriarchs. We could say that the conversion to Judaism really begins with Abraham, at least as Philo of Alexandria and certain other ancient rabbinic texts as well. What is the word for convert? Well, it's ger. And the word ger generally means proselyte. It also means resident alien. Now, who does resident alien refer to? Well, this will give you a very clear understanding as to what happened. Resident aliens refer to non-Jewish people who lived in the land of Israel, who took upon themselves to obey the constitution of the Jewish people. They observed all the holidays. They observed the Shabbat. They were not, they were not necessarily circumcised, to the best of my knowledge, but they could participate in many of the Jewish holidays. And the Torah is very, very emphatic. It tells us that v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, also applies to v'ahavta et hager. You shall love the resident alien who dwells among you. And so what happened was, it was only natural for the resident aliens to make a gradual change into embracing all the laws of Jewish tradition, all the laws of the Torah. And so that's where the term ger originally began. So the stranger that dwells among you shall be as a homeborn among you. You shall love him as yourself, because you are strangers in the land of Egypt. And it also says the one law shall apply to you as well as to the resident alien. So Judaism is not xenophobic. The Bible is not xenophobic. In fact, if you take a look at rabbinic tradition, almost anyone can convert to Judaism, even if you come from the people of Amalek. Amalek, you say? Who are they? Well, Amalek was the Bedouin people that attacked the Israelites when they went out of Egypt. Haman is a descendant from Amalek. And a lot of people would like to say that Hitler was also a descendant of Amalek. And some people today would even go so far to say that someone like Yasser Arafat is probably from Amalek. Well, if you follow Forrest Gump's definition of Judaism, what would Forrest Gump say? Jewish is as Jewish does. And Amalek, who's Amalek? Amalek is as Amalek does. So if Amalek hates Jewish people, what does that tell you? Anyone who has this irrational hatred of the Jewish people could be identified at least with the archetype of Amalek. Now, interesting question comes up in the Bible. In the book of Joshua, we read about a people that the Israelite was commanded to wipe out. Wipe out through genocide. You ask, did the Israelites practice genocide? The answer is, of course not. Our people never practiced genocide. They might have expelled people in what's called ethnic cleansing, but the Israelites and Canaanites got along famously. But there's one story in particular that's very, very surprising, arguably even shocking. The Gibeonites are fearful of what the Israelites might do when they come into their land. So what do? Anyone know? Well, they become, if memory serves me correct, the Gibeonites hide their true identity, and they become ultimately the water carriers of the Israelite people. Now you might wonder, was their conversion really sincere? Did they really convert to Judaism by accepting the laws of Torah? What if a person's motivation is not pure? Does that invalidate somebody? Motivation, intentionality are important things. If you don't have proper intention, most Orthodox, I would say all Orthodox, probably most conservative and even some Reform might think twice and probably turn that person away. But the Gibeonites are accepted. Now, if the Gibeonites were to come to the rabbinate in Israel today, what do you think they would say? You're disingenuous, we will not accept you. What about Ruth? Ruth is dissuaded by Naomi after her husband dies, and after the husband of Oprah dies. No, we're not talking about the TV show host, Oprah Winfrey. Oprah goes back to her homeland. But what is Ruth's response? She says, your God will be my God. Where you go, I will go. And she refuses to abandon Naomi. And she is embraced as a member of the Israelite people. This is the book of Ruth. Wait a minute. Ruth raises a very important question. An embarrassing question. What does the Torah tell us in the book of Deuteronomy? It tells us we shall not accept converts from Canaanite peoples. And we're not allowed to accept converts from the tribe or from the people of Moab and Ammon. So how do we explain this here? Well, where does Ruth originate from? Moab. Where does Moab come from? Moab, you may recall, comes from the family of Abraham. Moab comes from Lot, Abraham's nephew. Lot is fleeing Sodom and Gomorrah, and he gets plastered, he gets drunk, and his daughters are afraid that the world is ended, so they have sex with their father, and they give birth to Ammon and Moab. Well, why does the Torah tell us that? Maybe to tell us, or indicate, suggest perhaps even, that there is a spark of holiness that's in Lot and his descendants, because they are mishpacha, they are family. And what happened later in Israelite history was the Moabites were fierce people. In fact, if you take a look at the 7th century, they had a ruler named Mesha. Mesha was fighting against the Israelites. The Israelites were kicking, you know what. And the Mesha, who is the Moabite king, sacrifices his son to the god of Kamosh. And the Israelites are so disgusted by this, so shocked by this, that Mesha completely routs the tribes living in the Transjordan area. What we would call today Transjordan or Jordan. Interesting passage. Some of our ancestors really did not like Moabites for many reasons. What about David? Where did David come from? King David is a descendant of Ruth. In fact, there's a hidden polemic in the story of Samuel. What do you think Saul tells people? David is not a real Jew. He comes from Moab, one of our enemies. Kind of interesting. And so David's status was questioned. Now imagine David, young David, going to the Israeli rabbinate today and asking the rabbis, can I convert to Judaism? What do you think the rabbis would tell him? No. What would the rabbis tell Ruth? Answer's obvious. No. Our attitude about people embracing Judaism has changed throughout the centuries. And there was a time, in the first century in particular, when Jewish communities made a concerted effort to welcome as many non-Jews as possible. What was their motivation? Where did this all start? Inquiring minds want to know. Well, let's go back to Alexandria. What happened in Alexandria? King Ptolemy Philadelphus II wanted to build the great library of Alexandria. And he was particularly interested in the Jewish people and their Torah. And he wanted a translation. And a lot of Jews living in Alexandria thought this was a great idea for many reasons. What's the most important reason? Jews had forgotten Hebrew. They now needed a translation. But the translation also had a missionary purpose. Our ancestors saw what Alexander did when he went around the world and conquering nations. The Jews of Alexandria had a unique vision. They wanted to convert the entire civilized world to Judaism. And so they called their work a Septuagint, which in Greek means 70. 70 what?
Elders.
70 elders. Who are the 70 elders? Moses' assistants. They were the ones who communicated Moses' words to the people. They became the prototype of the Sanhedrin. Now, and so the writers of the translators of the Bible had a missionary purpose. Now, something interesting happened. Many people, when they read the Torah in translation, were very, very impressed by its ethics. Bear in mind, Aristotle thought that a slave was nothing more than an animated tool. You want to know his attitude? Just read the beginning of his work on the Athenian Constitution. Enslaved persons had no rights throughout Greece and Rome. Even Seneca. You know Seneca, don't you? Don't tell me applesauce. Seneca was a brilliant jurist and philosopher, a Stoic thinker. Seneca said that a master who frees his slave could later reclaim his liberated slave and force him back into slavery. What was the Jewish attitude about slaves? Once they're free, they're free. Philo says freedom is the natural birthright of every human being. It's very easy to see why people in the Greco-Roman world would find Jewish ethics appealing, especially since so many of the people were enslaved. On the other hand, not everyone had such a positive view of the Bible. Some people read the Bible and they interpret the stories very differently. Imagine a non-Jewish person who might have, you might say, anti-Semitic feelings towards the Jewish people. He reads the story of Jacob. And what does Jacob do? Jacob famously deceives his brother, deceives his father. Now, my name is Johnny Anti-Semite. And I'm reading this. What am I thinking about the Jews? Well, I don't think I'm going to purchase a new chariot from the Jews. A used chariot, like a used car? Sorry, ain't gonna happen. And what else don't I like about the Jewish people? They're clannish. They don't eat together with Gentiles. They don't worship the Greek pantheon or the Roman pantheon. They're very, very standoffish. Why do they feel this way? Probably because they think they're superior to everyone else. Probably because they think their God is superior to everyone else. Romans had no trouble accepting gods from other nations. Romans had no difficulty accepting the gods of Egypt, or the gods of African peoples, or other Mesopotamian peoples. But the Jews posed a very interesting problem. And that's how anti-Semitism began. And you could say that the notion of a chosen people that we find in the book of Exodus, what did that mean to a Greek? How dare these people think they're chosen? Who the heck they think they are? Inquiring minds want to know. Well, where do we go from here? So what happened was Jewish philosophers in Alexandria decided that they had to create an outreach program to demystify Judaism, to teach basic ethical principles of Judaism. And so 2 centuries before Philo, you had a Jewish philosopher named Aristobulus. We don't have much of his works today, even though he wrote a lot. Very similar thinker to Philo in many respects. And so he emphasized the idea of the Shabbat as a day for all humanity to celebrate. Every human being is entitled to rest on Shabbat. And you don't have to be a wealthy Israelite. You could be a poor Israelite. You could be a poor Gentile. Even animals are entitled to have rest on Shabbat. Again, and Philo stressed the ethics of ancient Judaism. And something marvelous happened. You know what happened? Judaism started to grow as a missionary religion. In Israel alone, of course, there were millions of Jews, but did you know there were millions of converts, Jewish converts in Rome? Well, how do you know this, Rabbi? Have any of you ever been to Rome? Well, if you've been to Rome, you might probably have heard about the catacombs. And these are the underground cemeteries of Rome. And you'll find hundreds and thousands of people. And you'll see stars of David on many of the tombstones. Wow. What happened here? Let's turn to Tacitus. Let's turn to other ancient writings, historical writings of the first century, writings of the satiricist Juvenal and others. What do you find? What do you discover? They're complaining about the Jews. A conquered people is now conquering the Roman people, the Roman Empire. Can you imagine the irony in that? Didn't we just destroy their country? These people are now in a diaspora, and what are they doing? They are spreading out everywhere throughout Rome. And Judaism was starting to become a very, very popular religion. Wow. How is this possible? Nero, according to Talmudic tradition, converted to Judaism. And it's probably not true. The rabbis, when they wrote about people converting to Judaism in the first century, wrote this down in the Talmud 400 or 500 years later. They could not have possibly gotten all the details correct. The recollection of history was very limited. But what we do know is that Nero's wife did convert to Judaism, and she built one of the very first synagogues in Rome. Isn't that something? And as Judaism was spreading its wings, now you've got to ask yourself the question, how is Judaism able to grow? The reason why, I believe, is because people like Hillel did not suffer from xenophobia. When a person wanted to convert to Judaism, even though they were trying to make fun of the Jewish faith by asking Hillel to stand on one foot to teach them the entire Torah, Hillel does not chase the prospective proselyte out with a stick like Shammai, his colleague. He found a way to welcome the outsider. He found a way to create a context for people to enter and join and discover what it means to be Jewish. This is one of the interesting parallels between Hillel and Philo of Alexandria. And they both believed that Judaism had something great to offer all people, no matter where they came from. Did all the rabbis agree with Hillel? It's kind of an interesting question. Here's another story. A Gentile comes to Hillel and says, "Convert me on condition that I become a high priest." Now, is that prospective proselyte's motivation pure? Inquiry minds want to know. What did Hillel tell him? He said, not even David, King David, is allowed to serve in the priestly capacity. And David is the descendant of proselytes. And if that applies to a proselyte like David, David comes from a family of proselytes, then it certainly applies to you also. Another person comes to Hillel, and he makes a bet that he can make Hillel upset. So he begins asking, why do certain people from Asia have slanted eyes? Why do Ethiopians have broad feet? And he asks these questions on the eve of Shabbat. What are most pious Jews doing on the eve of Shabbat? Inquiring minds want to know. They're running around like crazy trying to get ready for Shabbat. Hillel was listening to each question, and he answered all the questions he had patiently without showing the least bit impatience or irritation. So what does the man say to Hillel? Are you Hillel, the Nasi of the Jewish people, the leader of the Jewish people? Yeah, he said, I am. That's what the people say I am. May there never be another person like you. So why do you say that, my son? Because of you, I lost $500 on a bet. I made a bet I can make you upset, and you did not get upset. And what does Hillel say in return? Better for you to lose not only 500, but 1,500 shekels, or whatever the amount of money happened to be, than for people to say that Hillel lost his school. Well, isn't that interesting? Think about that for a moment. All three of these individuals that Hillel had encountered at different times met at a mikveh. What exactly is a mikveh? A mikveh is a pool of water, like a Roman bath. Now, if you really want to know what a real mikveh is, it's more like a stream, like the ocean. The mikveh that we have today comes directly from Roman tradition. Oh, there's some great stories about that. Did I ever tell you about the rabbi that went to a mikveh that had a statue of Aphrodite in the mikveh? And one of the Jewish patrons of this mikveh asked the rabbi, "What are you doing here? How could you be in a mikveh that's dedicated to Aphrodite?" And so the rabbi, Rabban Gamliel, says, "Well, I'm not invading her space. She's really invading my space." Clever answer. I just wanted to mention that the rabbis in ancient times practiced a little different kind of Judaism from what we practice today. They were a lot more liberal and loose with the laws than you might imagine. Here's another case. So I told you before about the three men, and they said, "Thank God, Hillel brought us under the wings of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence. For had we stopped with Shammai, we would never have become Jewish." Tractate Menachos 44a tells us a story about Rebbe Chia. A woman says to Rebbe Chia, who's one of the great rabbis of the 4th century, I'm in love with one of your students. What's going on here? Inquiring minds want to know. Well, I think it's logical to presume that this student of Rabbi Chia had a sexual relation with this non-Jewish woman. And she says, I want to be converted to Judaism so I can marry this young scholar. Was her motivation pure? What do you think? And this raises a very interesting question that modern rabbis deal with all the time. Do we convert somebody to Judaism who wishes to embrace Judaism or wishes to embrace a Jew? What is their motivation? If they're just interested in embracing a Jew, then maybe we should not accept them. And many rabbis would send this person packing. But Rebbe Chia said, no, that is not our way. So what did he do exactly? He converted the woman. Now the rabbis tell us that Rebbe Chia had a prophetic inspiration where he saw great people coming from this convert. I say to that, Baba Mises. What are Baba Mises? Bobby Mises. Grandma tales. Don't believe it for a minute. But you see, this is a very interesting thing about Jews. Jews throughout the diaspora, throughout the Middle Ages, even to modern times, often lived in towns where there were no Jews. So what did they do? Well, we know from DNA tests and everything that many of them married non-Jewish women. Maybe was there a court to convert the non-Jewish person? Probably not. Probably not. Remember what I said about the Forrest Gump definition of Jews and Judaism. Jewish is as Jewish does. If a person is practicing Judaism and they're living by Judaism, they identify as a Jew, they are, for all practical purposes, Jewish. I know that probably doesn't sound terribly orthodox, but that's the way it's been throughout history. All right, so Judaism was growing by leaps and bounds in the first 2 centuries. Why did it shrink so drastically? That is a very important question. Well, Rome was experiencing great social deterioration. The Roman Empire had suffered from numerous plagues, possibly the plague of Antonine, sometimes believed to be smallpox. We really don't know what the diseases were. We have descriptions from Galen and Hippocrates. It could have been many, many different things. Some say that the plague came originally from China, of all places. Isn't that something? Well, Constantine had a mother who converted to Christianity. And Constantine converted to Christianity. So the Christianization of the Roman Empire brought about some very significant changes. And this applies to the Eastern Orthodox Church that was even more zealous than the Catholic Church. So they enact a law. What law do they institute? Jews are not allowed to convert Christians to Judaism. And if they do, guess what happens? Wow. Okay. Now, the early church fathers who governed Rome with Constantine weren't fools. So they would send Johnny Gentile. Hi, my name is Johnny Gentile, Johnny Goy. They send him to the rabbis as a spy. Oh, Rabbi, I'm a Christian. I want to become Jewish. And what does the rabbi say unthinkingly? Yes, my son, we're happy to welcome you to the faith. And guess what happens? Knock, knock. Who's there? And guess who's there? The ecclesiastical gendarmes, the police. They arrest the rabbi, and they say, you're not supposed to convert Christians to Judaism, and they summarily execute the rabbi and his co-officiants immediately. What did this do psychologically to our people? A very good question. We started becoming distrustful. We started, there's a story about Groucho Marx. What did Groucho Marx famously say? I would never become a member of a country club that would have me as one of its members. So in other words, we figured and we said to ourselves, if somebody wants to convert to Judaism, they either have ulterior motives or they're crazy. At any rate, we have to be willing to dissuade them. And that's where the practice of dissuading a potential proselyte 3 times originated. This would never have occurred in the age of Rabbi Chia or Hillel or Philo of Alexandria. But the Jews had now lived in a new kind of society where Jews were persecuted. And what did Christians say to their fellow Romans? You're not responsible for killing the Jews. For killing Jesus. The Jews are responsible. So they smoldered the embers of anti-Semitism. And Jews started, at that period of time, in the Middle Ages, they started retreating inwardly. And they had less and less to do with the non-Jewish world. And there was a lot of distrust towards the Gentiles. And so this is why the practice of dissuading Jews, of a person wishing to convert to Judaism, is still practiced today in many, many Orthodox places. And probably some conservative. Now, I use a different method. No less effective. I required people to convert to Judaism to come to services for a whole year, come to classes, try to keep the dietary laws as much as they possibly can. There are a lot of ways of challenging a person to become observant of Judaism. You don't have to chase them away with a stick, but you can make it a little challenging. And if they're serious, they'll follow through. And if they're not, well, guess what? There's no obligation to convert somebody just for the sake of converting them. But we have a lot of interesting laws here. There's a a fabulous story about Maimonides. Maimonides used to write what's called responsa. What exactly is responsa? These are questions that people ask about Jewish law. Today, you would say, ask a rabbi. Might be an example of modern day responsa. What does Judaism say about the Johnny Depp trial? Modern day question. What does Judaism say about exploring outer space? Another modern question. And so these questions have turned into a vast literature called responsive literature. In Hebrew, it's called Shalom Teshuvot. Questions and answers people ask about Judaism. So Maimonides lived in Egypt. He was physician to Saladin. A case came before him about a young man who had a Gentile woman living with him as a maidservant. A lot of the people in the community didn't exactly like that. So they felt that something had to be done. So what did Maimonides say? He said he has to convert that woman to Judaism. So he will not be living sinfully with a non-Jewish person. Okay. Here again is an illustration of how Orthodox Judaism has always been what I call not Orthodox, flexodox. What do I mean flexodox? Flexible. How do you say flexible in Spanish, George?
Flexible.
Flexive. Dox. And this ability to adapt to new circumstances is something that's always been has always helped and benefited our people. Now let's take a look at it from another perspective.
So many provable ones.
Hold on.
So, and we even have that. It's very different.
I've been listening to the Johnny Depp story. My phone just accidentally went on. All right. What are the requirements to be Jewish? If you're a man, you have to be circumcised. Now, or what's the other thing? You have to have a Jewish mother. Where does that come from? Inquiring minds want to know. Now, Reformed Jews believe in what's called patrilineal descent. What is patrilineal descent? This means if you have a Jewish father, that's sufficient. Historically, if you read the stories of the Bible, you will find that the sons of Jacob all married Gentiles. Every one of them. So did they practice matrilineal descent or patrilineal descent? You know the answer. They practiced patrilineal descent. King Solomon marries an Ammonite, idolatrous, I might add. Has a son named Rehoboam, who becomes the next king, very corrupt king, I might add. Was his mother, was he Jewish matrilineally or patrilineally? Patrilineal was the way it went, and this changed in Roman times. Why did it change in Roman times? Because many Jewish women were raped by Roman soldiers. And Roman soldiers obviously cannot, obviously there's no Jewish identity there if you believe in patrilineal descent. But the rabbis made a very earthy observation. A mother can always recognize her children, but may not necessarily be able to recognize their father. In the United States, actually this is coming up. We just celebrated Mother's Day. What's coming up this Sunday, I think? Father's Day. What would you say if I told you Father's Day is a very confusing holiday for many people in different parts of our country? Why is that? Because a lot of people don't know who their fathers are. And so this is why Judaism switched to matrilineal descent. Now, Reform Jews are kind of interesting. They say that you really isn't enough to just simply have a Jewish parent. You also have to be raised as a Jew. Interesting requirement. And I'll tell you that some Orthodox rabbis would probably agree with that to some degree, to some measure. I know rabbis in Los Angeles. I'm not sure if if he's alive, he's probably in his 80s right now. His name is Jack Simcha Cohen. He had a great joke he would say about himself. He asked, why are you writing on the title of your book, Jack Simcha Cohen? Why not Jack S. Cohen?
Jackass.
Because I don't want to be identified as Jackass Cohen. That's self-deprecating humor, my dear friends. You got it? Okay, so what did he had communicated with Orthodox rabbis like Moshe Feinstein, one of the great rabbis of our time, of my generation. And he was of the view with day schools, Hebrew day schools, that they should accept children from mixed families. Families that may not have, where the mother is either Gentile or may not have even gone through Orthodox conversion. Because his attitude is that we have to welcome children. We have to save the children. We may not be able to save the parent or make the parent Jewish, but if we could welcome the children, that's just as good. And this was the attitude of a lot of rabbis. Rabbi Ben-Zion Uziel, who was the first Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel back in the 1920s, 30s and so. He's one of my heroes. He was one of the early advocates of women's suffrage. Now you might be surprised to know that a lot of Orthodox Jews back then were opposed to women having the right to vote. Now if you go to Israel today, what do you discover about Orthodox Jews? The most Orthodox Jews you can think of. The most ultra-Haredi. You know what they do on election day? Every one of them votes. Why do they vote? Because they understand there's strength in numbers and getting what you want. But back then, Rabbi Ben-Zion Uziel was quite liberal. And there were a lot of Jews after World War II who were coming to settle in Israel, and many of them came from mixed families. So what was his attitude? His attitude was you must convert every one of these families as much as you possibly can. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Many of them are not Jewish. They're not Jewish. How do you know they're going to be sincere? He said, even if they're not sincere, still accept them. And he said that they represent the lost children of Israel. And he created a new category that you don't hear about very much in Orthodox circles. A lot of people think that you're either Jewish or you're not. But they fail to understand something. That Judaism is not necessarily binary. And what Rabbi Ben-Zion Uziel urged is for us to embrace a category called Zera Yisrael. Zera Israel, someone of Jewish, who is of Jewish lineage of Israel. And he says the prophets speak about this. Isaiah, Jeremiah, they speak about the lost remnant of Israel shall be brought back, and we must welcome them. Who is the lost remnant? These are people, who have Jewish fathers, have Jewish ancestry, but they've drifted far from their people. So what is our obligation as a community? We have to welcome them back. And if we don't welcome them back, he says, rabbis who refuse to accommodate these people will have to answer to God himself in the next world. That's very powerful language. Let me tell you an interesting story here. There was a very great Orthodox rabbi of the early 20th century. He was a disciple of Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. I think in many ways he was much greater. I'm not a great fan of, I'm not a big fan of Samson Raphael Hirsch. David Hoffman was born 1843, died in Berlin 1921. He was a remarkable biblical scholar and wrote on every aspect of Jewish law. So, in the 19th century, with Jews leaving the ghetto, they found themselves intermingling more with non-Jewish people. And in his time, if someone wanted to convert to Judaism to marry a Jew, you had to turn that person away. The attitude was that conversion must be performed out of purely sincere religious convictions. Here was a case of a man that was married to a woman, non-Jewish woman, and she was pregnant. Now, they were already married by civil law, so technically they were a couple. And one of the things that Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman says is that we must welcome the non-Jewish partner into the Jewish fold. He said, you might raise the objection, we may never say to a man, sin now in order that someone may gain merit. How can we ask the court to commit the sin of accepting a proselyte who is not converting for pure purpose, in order to deliver this woman from the great evil in all her life that she will live in sin? Has she not committed the first sin herself? And what he basically says is that if we don't convert this person, then they're going to raise children who think they're Jewish. And they're going to intermingle with other Jews, and this could create problems down the road. So the bottom line, he says, is that sometimes it's okay to commit a minor sin in order to prevent someone from doing a greater sin. Interesting approach. Now, I want to give you just a little bit of history. I forgot to mention something. Can someone be converted against their will? Well, this actually happened in the first century. John Hyrcanus, who was one of the Hasmonean kings, decided he was going to do something that's never been done before. So what did he do? He decided that they were going to convert the Edomites. And they said, you will convert or otherwise we're going to kill you. And guess what? The Edomites, who were brothers of the Israelites, were forcibly converted to Judaism. Isn't that something? Now, here's an interesting question I want to pose to you. Can a conversion be negated? Can a conversion be retroactively negated? Inquiring minds want to know. Let me use an argument from logic that's called reductio ad absurdum. Consider the following. There is this woman, a Christian woman, pious Catholic, who has a revelation. And she decides that she has to convert to ultra-Orthodoxy. And she goes to Jerusalem and eventually converts to ultra-Orthodoxy. And she has 25 children. Now that's one prolific lady. Wouldn't you say that, Dr. Don? A very prolific woman. Okay.
Yes, I would.
Okay, now each of those 25 children proceed to have another 25 children. And they're raised as what? Ultra-Orthodox. And a third generation, each of those 25 children have another 25 children. And by the time this woman, who converted to Judaism originally, is now 102 years old, she probably has close to 80 to 100,000 children who are definitely Jewish, right?
15,625.
What do I know? Okay. Now, 15,000 is still a large number, right? Okay, at age 102, she has this revelation. Jesus appears to her.
Hallelujah.
And she says, Lord Jesus, save me. And she goes back to her Christian faith. So if you believe that conversions could be retroactively negated, then what happens? What is the status of her children, of her 15,000 plus children? They're all Haredi, ultra-Orthodox Jews. Are we now going to say they're all ultra-Orthodox Gentiles? Obviously not. And Jewish law says something very interesting. It says that if a person converts to Judaism with an ulterior motive, they convert, and then that individual goes to Catholic Mass the very same evening. Does that mean the conversion is invalid? Well, guess what, dear friends? Jewish law says something that may seem counterintuitive to many of you. It says that woman is still Jewish, or that person is Jewish, but he's now considered to be a sinful Israelite. So, once somebody converts to the club of Judaism, They may go back to their pagan roots, their non-Jewish roots, or whatever they might be. But as far as we're concerned, we'll always recognize them as a member of the tribe.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
Is it true that the Mormons have converted Jews without their knowledge to Mormonism? Am I wrong about hearing something like that, or is that true?
That's an interesting question. You know, the Mormons are behind Ancestry.com, a very valuable website for people wanting to know about people's ancestry. But why do the Mormons engage in that? For one simple reason: they believe in converting the dead. I'll talk about captive audience. You know, we cannot, here's the bottom line. We cannot tell other people how to practice their religion, even if we disagree with it vehemently. And we could say it's really not nice to convert, especially Holocaust survivors who've died, give them a post-mortem conversion. In fact, here's the interesting thing about conversion that we discovered, is there's no such thing as a post-mortem conversion. It says, Hashemayim Shemayim Ladonai, the heavens belong to God, Ha'aretz natan livnei Adam, and the earth is given to man. V'lo kol yordei duma, and he's not, and the dead are in the earth. But we shall continue to praise God while we're alive. You cannot convert people post-mortem. Now, I have to tell you a very interesting issue. Part of the problem today of Israel and conversion is the issue of politics. And you might be surprised to know that Orthodoxy has not only arguments with conservative and Reform Jews, you have what's called Intra-Orthodox Debates. So what is an example of an Intra-Orthodox Controversy? In 2008, the Badats, that's the Beth and Tzedek of Jerusalem, they decided to annul thousands of conversions performed by the Israeli military rabbinate. The chief rabbinate of Israel, which is the only state-recognized authority in religious matters backed by Ovadia Yosef, ruled against this. Now here we have an argument among ultra-Orthodox and people who are modern Orthodox who convert to Judaism. Does the ultra-Orthodox have a right to take such a strident point of view? What do you think? Well, I would make the case that they do, on one condition. If I want to be a member of an ultra-Orthodox community and I wish to join their ranks, they have every right to insist that I go through their standards. But they do not have the right to dictate that their standards be observed by other Jewish communities. This is unprecedented. Jewish communities have never, ever behaved this way. Every Jewish community has the right to matriculate proselyte candidates the way they see fit. If another community, if one of my congregants wants to join an ultra-Orthodox community like Chabad or whatever, they better realize that they're not going to be recognized as Jews. They will not be called up to Torah for Aliyah. And chances are they probably won't be given very many other honors. But every community has the right to have their own standards. And so, what does this mean? This means that conservative Jews can, in fact, this is the ruling among conservative rabbis, will recognize Reform conversions. Even though it's not our kind of conversion, some communities are more tolerant than others. Now, you might be surprised to know that in Israel, Chabad conversions are not recognized. Now, why is that? Inquiring minds want to know. One reason is because Chabad has some very peculiar beliefs. What is one of their beliefs? That the Rebbe is Mashiach. The Rebbe is the Messiah. In fact, some people might speak of not just Paul. Christianity is sometimes called Paulianity. There's some Orthodox that speak of Chabad-anity. Others say just pure insanity. Well, that's what happens when people believe in a dead rabbi. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe did something that a lot of people don't realize. Chabad does a lot of outreach. And they're very good in the outreach they do. And I'll be one to applaud the good work they do in many different parts of the world. But back in the 1960s, the Lubavitcher Rebbe began a campaign called Mi Yehudi, who is a Jew. My book is falling apart. Who is a Jew? Anyone who converts to Judaism according to halacha, or anyone who has a Jewish mother. Well, that sounds reasonable enough, except for one thing. State of Israel is not a theocracy. And the State of Israel has a very different standard. State of Israel says that anyone who converts to Judaism, whether it's Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Humanistic, or whatever, we accept that person as a Jew. Now, what did that cause? That caused a great schism in Israel, because the Ultra-Orthodox control the marriage licenses. So what are most people doing in Israel who have a spouse who converted to conservative or Reform Jews? They tend to get married in Greece, in the United States, or any other place as a way of bypassing the problem. Here's the problem. Here's the difficulty. This is where we can learn something from anti-Semites. What is the law of anti-Semites?
All Jews are the same.
All Jews are the same. We don't care whether you call yourself Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reform, Orthopedic, Reconservadox, Orthoform. We don't care what you call yourself, or secular, humanistic, yada, yada, yada. We consider you Jewish. Now, we don't like anti-Semites, but that doesn't mean we can't learn something from them. If they recognize us as one people, maybe we would be wise to recognize ourselves as one people. There is a lot more to be said on the subject of this. If you like, we can do another session on it. Or I think we'll take questions now from anyone who wants to, ask a question. I can't believe I bored you all to death. Maybe I did. Any questions? And by the way, tonight is the 46th day of the Omer. Baruch Adonai Elohim melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat Omer hayom arba'im v'shisha yamim shehem shisha shavuot v'arba yamim la'omer. Okay, any questions here? We want to welcome to our community Yvette. Thank you for coming, Yvette. Yvette just went through conversion last week. That's the pretty lady in the blue and white picture.
Thank you very much.
We're proud to have you as part of our community. Dr. Don, do you have any questions or observations you want to make?
No, I enjoyed your little talk here tonight. It was interesting. I learned some new things. And so I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Good. Anik, do you have any questions?
No, I don't really.
Okay, let's see. George, you always have questions, observations. What do you want to say?
Believe it or not, I don't have many because most of the questions you've already have answered throughout the time that I've met you about, at least about conversion and stuff like that. Plus the books that you've given me help me a lot.
Okay, good. Here's something else Maimonides mentions. I want to say that Samson, for example, was married to Delilah. Did you know that Delilah had converted to Judaism? What about Solomon? Solomon was married to 1,000 wives. Yes, they converted to Judaism too.
Don't forget about Rahab.
Okay, now what do you know about Rachav? Okay, she is a Canaanite who gives the signal to Joshua when to enter into the town, and she uses a red string, which is the origin of the red light district in the Bible. Rachav was a prostitute, and Joshua marries a prostitute. Why I mention that? Because it's kind of interesting, because one of the ultra-Orthodox rabbis in Jerusalem married a French woman who converted to Judaism, who used to be a prostitute. And now you know the rest of the story.